when you strip it down, the 100,000 girls or more who were groomed and gang raped, they were trafficked to the country. And it's the organized gangs that do the trafficking. How far has democracy fallen? How low have our standards got where no one bats an eyelid to behavior that ordinarily would be reprehensible? Government voted to block an investigation as to how it came to be 100,000 little girls were gang raped. Community. We've lost a sense of community. We've lost the strength of community. And the way the system has been set up, it's to facilitate smaller nuclear families. Why did I get involved? Why didn't I just walk away? Because they destroyed my life. They tried to kill me.
Well, welcome there, Raja, Miah. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Ridiculously Human podcast.
Good morning, Gareth. Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure, buddy. So how is the north of England today? Like, I can only imagine this time of year is a little bit fresh, cold, rainy, miserable.
I dropped my daughter off in school just before I came home to catch this chat with you, and it is very typical northern weather. Bleak.
Oh, buddy. I mean, yeah, I must say you have an extremely smiley, good, positive character. Like especially the Poms, right? The British, like the weather you guys have to deal with, like, is pretty miserable. And I know because I lived there for a long time, and only once I left did I realize, I was like, wow, how did I survive? But yeah, it's not until you leave that you sort of get that feeling and knowledge.
No, it is, and it's you find happiness wherever you can, I think. But the weather isn't one of the places where we in the north tend to find happiness. So it is what it is. It's a constant drizzle.
Yeah.
People say, I mean, I lived in Manchester for a while, and Manchester's like the closest city. And they always said, oh, no, it doesn't rain all the time in Manchester. And there was this big PR campaign. No, it doesn't rain. There's only so many days of rain. And we all looked at each other. People who lived in the city all looked at each other and said, no, it does always rain. It does always rain.
Oh, that's for sure, bud. Look, we've got an amazing podcast to get through. You're wow, what you're doing is rather remarkable. But I'd just like to start a little bit with the tweet that sort of sets things up nicely. You write at this quite a bit. You say, my name is Raja Miah, MBE. In a past life, I advised governments on how to safeguard children and safeguard communities from extremism. Queen Elizabeth II put a medal on my chest for my services to our nation. So I'd like to just find out quickly, like, how real a threat is extremism to society? And maybe a good way to start that is to just maybe explain what maybe extremism is.
Well, the space that I occupied, and I can only talk about it from my own experience, I think, rather than some abstract way of looking at extremism, is I started working in the field I did as early as 1997, so 4 years before 9/11 took place. And the argument I was presenting government at the time, or trying to present to government, is when we go and meddle in other people's affairs, sometimes they come and meddle in ours. And we need to be very careful at what we're doing and what we're encouraging, because, and they used the term many years later, they called it blowback, where our enemies come to our own shores to hurt us and hurt people. So that's really where I started this journey. And in 2005, of course, the London bombings took place, and more recently, I think in 2016, I think it was, the Manchester Arena attack took place, where there was an Ariana Grande concert, and a young Libyan lad blew himself up and killed so many more, many children who had gone to a concert. So that's really where my work comes from, is how to safeguard communities from being drawn into strapping a suicide vest and going and blowing up innocent people. That's really where a lot of my work has been for a long time. And if I seem happy about it, it's because I'm no longer involved in that work, Gareth. Because no matter what you do with government, they always have their own ideas of what to do, and far too often innocent people, wherever in the world, it's innocent people who pay the price of governments that in no way represent them.
Yeah. Yeah, you just wonder about government sometimes, like who they actually think they are. You know what I mean? Like in terms of what their role is supposed to be, like by looking after the people, but they always seem to have their own agenda. And
Well, our prime minister yesterday, he went off to Ukraine. He went to Kiev and signed 100-year support agreement with Zelensky. And you start to wonder, well, what's all that about? What is all that about?
wow, that is just crazy. In relation to the extremism, like how little do you think people actually know? Like, and how big a threat is it? Like that.
In the United Kingdom, and you've got to understand, I'm classically from the left, so
Mm,
my politics historically been from the left. I'm Bangladeshi. I'm a Muslim. I'm a second generation immigrant. I all of my political leanings up to my mid forties, I would say, were left leaning, and increasingly, what I found was in a country such as the United Kingdom, the Labour Party, the left, the traditional left working class party, were entering into pacts in communities with ethnic minority groups in a colonial way, which is understandable because that's the history of this country. So they'd go to these community leaders who'd control votes, and they'd, in exchange for votes, they'd get favors. Happens everywhere. In terms of issues, it's not really an issue. But what was taking place in these communities over the last 20 years, 30 years, I'd even say, maybe a little bit longer. I think Salman Rushdie and the Satanic Verses, probably before you're born, brother, is a watershed moment of a political form of Islam entering the politics in the United Kingdom. And I'm sure it's the same in many other parts of the world. There'll be a watershed moment where they saw that transition. And it is a threat. It's a genuine threat. It's a threat to our democracy, and it's a threat to our way of life because these people ideologically want something else. They want a caliphate. It's as simple as that. And I said this as a Muslim. I said this as a Muslim, and they've bought into this them versus us narrative, this very oversimplified narrative that the West is the enemy and the Muslims are oppressed. And when you're oppressed and you can sell that narrative, you can go a long way. You can go a long way.
do you think there's any like way the world kind of resolves this?
Well, we've got to find a way. We've got to find a way to resolve this. And I think the starting point of resolving this is acknowledging that there's an issue. And we talk about it. I mean, you told me you're from South Africa, you're currently in Vietnam. You go to many liberal Western democracies. You go to many liberal Western democracies where multiculturalism has played a part in defining the identity of that country. In many instances, positively contributing. There is, with the third generation, fourth generation, particularly from the Muslim communities, there is this growing challenge where our children and our grandchildren's loyalty isn't to the land we came from, it isn't to the land we find ourselves in, it isn't even to their faith. It's to a political ideology that sets up the world where there are two sides. The Muslims are on one side and everyone else is on the other.
How do you think that like came about? Is it like taught in universities or grassroots, or is it
No, no,
something else?
I think it came about, and I've observed it in the places where I grew up, and the conversations I have with people who raised me, who look at it with bemusement and bafflement, really, because it's crept in, and the way it's come about is people from, particularly from my communities, when we were young, we would look at the civil rights movement, for instance, in the United States, and the stories of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and identify with that because there was a group of people who suffered oppression and overcame oppression. The young women who I grew up with, particularly the white young women who I grew up with, would look at the suffragette movement in the United Kingdom, the stories of Emily Pankhurst and what they did to overcome the prejudices against women. And what a demographic of Muslim young people are doing is now looking towards the Muslim Brotherhood, the groups in Palestine, people from Hamas, places like that, and drawing role models from there in terms of we are oppressed like these people. And the oppression and the experiences and the actual story there is not the same as the civil rights movement. It's not the same as the suffragettes movement, because actually what they wanted was equality. And what these people want is, I think, something else. Sadly, Gareth, I think it's something else. And that's why, even though perhaps they go into this arena looking to find themselves an identity that they can shape around how they experience oppression and prejudice, unfortunately, the solutions offered by these people are not conducive with the safety of wider society. And that's a challenge for us. You know, what do you do to a 25-year-old kid who was born in the United Kingdom, who identifies more with Hamas than he does with the community that he lives around?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have no clue. Like I just,
I
yeah.
haven't got all the answers, brother. All I've got, and increasingly the older I get, is I have more questions than answers. But I always find there's value in asking questions rather than avoiding the questions, which is unfortunately where too many of our leaders like to take us, or deflecting away and blame us for asking questions. We've got a bizarre situation in the United Kingdom. I were last week, and it's how you and I came across each other. Uh, Last week, the government of my country voted to block an investigation into the gang rape of hundreds of thousands, or the conservative estimate is 100,000 children of the nation. You know, a government voted to block an investigation as to how it came to be that 100,000 little girls were gang raped. It's astonishing. I find it totally astonishing, and I think people across the world are scratching their heads trying to work out what sort of government does that.
Like if we just talk about that for a second, like why would they do that? Are these people, have they got like blackmail on them or something like that? Because it just seems like it makes zero sense. It seems like they've got zero heart and zero soul. They must have some dirt on them or something. Why would they vote that way?
My analysis of it, and it's a space I've occupied it every day and night for the last 6 years. And prior to that, I come with 20 years of working in these spaces. My analysis of it is threefold. One is there, as is always the case in political cover-ups, which this is, as is always the case in political cover-ups, there are politicians involved in the cover-up. And if it gets out, then these politicians will have to pay a price. I mean, what should happen is they should end up in prison. They won't end up in prison. I think the worst that will happen is that they'll be forced to resign. And so we clear some of the politicians involved, and I don't need to name them. I've named them online. But some of the politicians involved are at the highest level of His Majesty's government in the United Kingdom. So there's definitely that dimension. But in the wider sphere, I think it's more than that. There's two other aspects here. One is they are dependent on a block vote from the Muslim community. They just are. Over 90% of Muslims historically have voted for the Labour Party. And the way our electoral system works, we now, as well as people going to the ballot box to vote, there are record numbers voting by postal votes. So you apply for a vote, you get it sent to your house, you sign a piece of paper, you put a cross in it and put it back in an envelope and send it back. Those postal votes are, the entire system is so easily exploited by those who harvest postal votes, those who collect postal votes, sell postal votes. And that system is rigged. So it's in the interest of those in power to maintain that system and to support those who facilitate that exchange of votes. So I think that's another feature of as to why, because the truth will come out that those involved in abusing these children are also very senior figures in the communities that control how the votes are distributed. And then, of course, we've got this long-standing issue where there's a far right element, a genuine far right element. There's always been a genuine far right element who see the solution to this. So they'll say they are right, they were always right, and that these kids were groomed and gang raped, and no one believed them. I think that's an oversimplification of the facts, and all extremist groups, whether it's on the left or the right, oversimplify things in such a way as to avoid the complex, not just the complexities of the issue, but the weaknesses in their position. So whilst I can agree with you that there is a cover up of 100,000 or so children, maybe more, white working class children who are groomed and gang raped by what the government now acknowledges, so I don't have to say it anymore, the government now acknowledges as Pakistani rape gangs. The challenge we have is to accept and agree what we do about it. Now, the extremists will say, okay, we need to ban Islam and we need to ban the faith, which I personally don't think will get you anywhere. And the second thing they'll say is we need to send everyone back to whichever land they came from or their ancestors came from. So whilst the facts are correct, it's the way in which they frame why it's happened and what the solution is that causes the issue there. And the government then gets scared away from that. Instead of engaging in that conversation, just the way I have done with you now, and explained it or tried to explain it, whilst we do have a problem, the reasons for that problem might be how an extremist frames it, and the solutions most definitely are not how an extremist frames it. The government is either ill-equipped or unwilling to trust the people of the country to have those conversations with. And I don't think that in any democracy takes you to a good place where the people who represent you are too fearful to have the conversations with you that are defining the society that you live in on any issue.
It creates a lot of distrust in society, and that doesn't do anyone any good whatsoever. You know, like as soon as you are not trusting of your government, you're probably going to want to do something about it. And I don't know, it feels like in some way, like society's got a little bit too soft over, maybe, I don't know, a few centuries or something, but we just have let a lot happen. But I do feel that like eventually people are going to say, you know what, enough's enough. And if they're not seeing their governments actually helping them, then it could get quite nasty. I don't know. It's just like an assumption based on.
No.
Yeah.
It's not an assumption. I think you're very accurate because we had a series of riots in Southport, or after the Southport horrific incident of 3 children being stabbed to death, and the way the government reacted, and a whole host of riots then took place across the country. And I'm not excusing the behavior of people trying to burn mosques down or trying to burn hotels down, housing asylum seekers. People who do that need to be in prison. But there is an undercurrent there. There is an undercurrent there of people not trusting the story coming out of the government. The government is not being honest with the challenges that we have. And we're increasingly finding ourselves where the government's reaction is to come down heavy like an over strict parent, and anyone who is a parent who is or has been over strict with their child knows that that has never solved the issue. If anything, it further emboldens the child and creates animosity within that child to rebel even further and to go to even more extremes. And I think society is no different to that. And we are in a position, I think, where the separation between the government and the people could not be any further than it has been It's certainly in my lifetime, certainly in my lifetime. And the way I reflect on this, I think we're now in a position where, for a whole host of people in this country, a whole range of demographics in this country, the government has effectively declared war on its own people.
Yeah, it does feel like that. Hypothetically, if you say got into power in government, like what would be, say, maybe one or two things that you would try and implement to, one, get the people back on your side, but also try and ease the tensions that definitely do exist in society, perhaps say between the extremes.
I so if you frame this through the grooming gangs, which is what we began our conversation, you and I began our interactions. First and foremost, you've got to put people in prison. You've got to arrest and put in prison those who are responsible. Now, I don't know if you're aware, but there's a police operation that was launched in the northwest of England around Manchester called Operation Sherwood. And Operation Sherwood had 100 designated police officers. In the 3 years that has gone on since it was launched, it's made one arrest. And the reasons they're giving unofficially appear to be that the survivors and the victims don't trust the police. Now, if the police has failed you when you were a child and you were repeatedly gang raped, and then told you it was your fault, and then told you you would get arrested if you kept bringing it up, it's completely understandable that such an individual would be extremely reluctant to now engage with the police. So how do you build that trust back up? And I'm very clear. Instead of going after the grooming gangs first, because the survivors won't give you the have no faith in you, you have the evidence to go after those who covered it up, those who were responsible, positions of public authority, who had positions, who failed these children. You can go after those. You can discipline them. You can force them to issue apologies. You don't have to put many of these people in prison, because I'm sure they were doing what they were doing because they were told to do it. And in fact, I know they were told to do it. And you can also go after the politicians who are overtly complicit in covering up what was done. Now, if that was done, then I believe you would build, or go a long way to building, trust again in a system that has failed these young people. And then these young people will engage with the authorities because they'll have seen a change in the authorities. The authorities, those in positions of power, have got to change, and they've got to demonstrate that change. And I think that's the focus for me, is how do you demonstrate that change? And it might be that you demonstrate that change in other ways, but what is clear is standing in front of a camera and saying lessons have been learned has never worked and will definitely now not work, because we know it to be just a cliche. So that's what I would say first and foremost. And in terms of what I'd see changed increasingly in our country, and I presume, not even presume, my experiences of democracies across the world, is that we increasingly see the world through a lens of identity politics, where the identity we embrace is the one that is most adversarial or confrontational, or the one that we see as a victim. And it's how does government go about addressing some of that and helping build and shape a better identity, or an identity that we can all embrace, and then create the systems and processes to make sure that we strive towards a just and equal society. Because I accept that. I look around, my own experiences are that society is unjust, and it favors some groups more than it favors others. And that's a universal problem, isn't it, Gareth? That's nothing new. It will still be an issue long after you and I have gone. But to acknowledge it exists and commit to trying to do something about it, particularly those groups who have historically been demonized. So in a country such as mine, in the hierarchy of race, the group that's actually at the bottom isn't brown-faced people like me or the new black African communities or the refugees who are coming in from places like Iraq. It's actually and I use this term in inverted commas, and is the indigenous working class white communities who can trace their families back to for hundreds of years. And if we don't get those groups on side, we've got no chance. We've got absolutely no chance.
Yeah, I mean, like I hear you speaking, right? And I'm like, this makes so much sense. It's not complicated at all. Why are people like you, say, not in government? If you think about it, you look at the people in governments and you're like, half of them, you're like, you're just useless. Like, not even half of them, probably 99% of them, you're like, you're just useless. And it feels like there's no one really wants to go into government because I don't know, maybe there's not enough money in it or whatever the story is.
No,
Maybe you get too much grief.
no, I don't think it's money. I think there are plenty of people from outside who would, if given the opportunity, go into government. But the way in which the political parties are structured in the United Kingdom, it's a rigged environment, and where those who get the opportunities, either, and particularly in like the Labour Party, which is the historical working class party, the way in which that party's structure operates has changed considerably from when the party was formed 100 or so years ago. And working class men like me who come to a space with life experiences. I mean, I talk to you. Yes, I've read every book I need to read, but my experience isn't based upon reading every book. My experience is based upon doing the work for 20 years, for 25 years. And I genuinely believe it gives you a completely different perspective than going to university, getting a degree, and getting yourself a role in an MP's office, and then before you know it, you're an MP somewhere. There's no substitute for real world experience.
Knowing what you know, right? Do you like live in any fear, or has it actually done the opposite to you and sort of calloused you as a person?
They There were moments in my journey, particularly over the last 6 years. And to give some context, to go back, I've sat in rooms with terrorists. So I have no, in terms of a benchmark, I'm okay. I can handle most things. And then I came back, lived in a town, campaigned on this issue. And there are moments in my life where I've made it very clear to my friends who I spoke to when it was very dark and it looked like I would be killed for what I was doing and what I was saying, where my ask of them was to look after my daughter and make sure she'd be okay. So, in terms of fear, no, consequences 100%.
Yeah, that gives me a lump in my throat because, like, I've got a young daughter too, and I just couldn't imagine ever thinking about not being around for her with the sort of
Yeah.
thing. So, yeah, it
Yeah,
must be.
she was five. She was 5 or 6 at the time. These people, the politicians in my country, I think that it's the same in every country. If you dig deep enough, there's a direct association with dangerous organized crime groups, and it's the organized crime groups who are trafficking these children. I mean, the oversimplified arguments, it's the religion that makes them do it. Of course, we've come across that all throughout history. People go and use religion as an excuse to do horrific people to other groups of people. But actually, fundamentally, when you strip it down, the 100,000 girls or more who were groomed and gang raped, they were trafficked across the country. And it's the organized gangs that do the trafficking. It's the same people who sold the heroin, who injected these children with heroin, piled them up with vodka, are the same ones who are selling the heroin and are involved in the in the criminal underworld. And so much so in my town, they don't even hide it anymore, Gareth. They don't even hide it anymore. We're in a bizarre situation. And the police arrested me a couple of times because I raised this. But I'm clear. It's in the public interest. The leader of the council, so we have a council, a local authority, the leader of the council, is also the chair of the National Constitutional Committee of the Labour Party. So she's the chairman of a national body in the government, essentially, because the Labour Party is in government in this country. She hangs off the arm of a convicted heroin dealer who was the getaway driver of a cop killer. And no one cares. No one bats an eyelid.
It's very strange what we're going through. That's for sure. And I don't think it's just the UK. It's a lot of countries, like you
No,
said. And
I think it's across the board. I think, how far has democracy fallen? How low have our standards got when no one bats an eyelid to behavior that ordinarily would be reprehensible?
I had another guy on my podcast ages ago, just talking about something that lines up with what you're kind of saying there, but also what I was maybe trying to insinuate early on. Like he's like, sometimes you'll walk past kids on the sidewalk. He was in America, right? And he's like, and you'll see them misbehaving. And he's like, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe you would have said to the kid as an adult, hey, no, what you doing? You must, you must greet me, and you can't behave like that. These days, you will just completely ignore it as a human. And, and that's also what's part of the problem is like we allow this behavior to happen because it's either like a moral thing or a strength thing, but we've lost a bit of that. Like I feel
we've lost community. We've lost a sense of community. We've lost the strength of community. And the way the system has been set up, it's to facilitate smaller nuclear families, to facilitate the pursuit of money and wealth, and to opt out of contributing to the environment in which you live around. I'm very clear. I remember many a time when I was a young person where some random man would grab hold of me by my ear and march me home, because I'd been up to mischief or not behaved in the way perhaps I should have done. And then my father or mother would be, would do twice as bad to whatever had took place. If you said something to a young person now, the likelihood is they'd phone the police, and you'd be the one who's arrested. Never mind, be grabbed hold of by the ear. And society has changed, Gareth. It's changed, and I don't think it's changed for the better. In fact, I know it's not changed for the better. Have a look around you. Have a look at some of these neighborhoods. What's gone on? What's going on? Where will it end? Where does it go? Because the way I experienced it is myself and most of my friends, we just moved out. We just got ourselves jobs and thought, okay, we're a product of that community and that environment, but nowhere do we want to live in it. Nowhere do we want to bring our children up in it. And we moved out rather than perhaps doing what we should have done is stay to fight to improve it. And that's, those conversations and those experiences, I think, take place on even a bigger scale. People leave a country, don't they? People stand up and get up and say, okay, I'm leaving. I'm leaving because I don't like how it's changing around me.
Yeah, and having even that, like having reflected back on you as a person, I mean, I left my country not because I was 18, I just wanted to travel and see the world
Yeah,
and
well,
stuff.
you want
But
to do a different thing. You're going around, you want to experience the world. Some people run away, though, don't they? Some people say, okay, I can't fix this problem. I can't be part of the solution, and I'm going to leave.
yeah, but where I was going to go with that as well was say, like I've experienced in South Africa that this happens a lot. Like people leave because the crime is really bad, and everything is on a sort of individual level. If you've someone's tried to rape you or hijack you or rob your house with guns and tied you up and stuff, you're probably not going to want to live there. And in some ways, okay, cool, fair enough, go and leave. So it is sometimes difficult to stay and fight, but you're definitely right. There is a trend of, say, taking action and being accountable and pushing back. That's
Well,
we're
where do we
all
stop running, brother? Where do
Yeah,
we stop running? When do we
agreed.
stop running? Where do we stop running? You know, and I look at, and I've got friends of mine from Johannesburg, also left, yeah, and uh, and they reflect as well. And I look at it and think, okay, but you didn't have the power to do anything. But on this issue, in this town, in this country, we do have the power. And you know, the United Kingdom is small. It's a
Mm.
very small land. It's nothing like some of the places where you are. So we have nowhere to go. Yes, you can go to a safer neighborhood, or you can go 5 miles away to the countryside or something. But in the end, we've got nowhere to go. And if we don't fight, and I don't mean, you know, on the street sort of protesting, but we don't fight in terms of using our democracy to protect ourselves and to safeguard our way of life, then we'll lose it. And I had this conversation, I think it was with a BBC, an ex BBC guy who I did a podcast with recently, Andrew Gold is called, and it's like, where do we go if we don't fight now? We'll lose. We'll lose in a generation, and the world changes. Civilizations fall. The world changes. And it's only arrogance to think that we're better than what came before.
Yep. Yeah, that actually really like makes me think actually like, okay, cool. Personally say on a personal level, cool. I need to do something more, you know. So anyway, this is great.
No, I told you, take it wherever you want.
Yeah,
Take the conversation wherever you want, and I'll do my best, you know.
no, it's really good. Like I think a lot of us can actually just even apply that kind of like lesson or theory to our own lives in many ways, you know. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff does start with the individual. We cannot rely on the powers that be to lead us, probably, you know, like the way they should. We actually have to start it, which is exactly what you are doing, right? I just want to read a tweet that's from a guy called Rupert Lowe, and he's an MP in the UK.
I
Um,
spoke to Rupert. I spoke to Rupert a couple of times. He's a Reform MP. He's one of the new wave of MPs who have been elected on the promise of sweeping reforms. You know, Britain needs reform is the sort of strapline.
yeah, it definitely does. If it happens, is definitely is also
Yeah,
another.
well, you know, yeah, saying it and doing it, as we all know. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. But he does seem like a great guy. Like, you know, at least through from what I read that he writes.
I
But
had a
this
good
is
chat to him. Talked to him. He seemed authentic. He cared, you know.
yeah. Yeah, he does definitely. This also sets like an. I mean, we've already touched, you know, a little bit effectively on the grooming stuff, but maybe people that are watching or listening like don't even really have an idea, right? But this kind of sets it up nicely to sort of you know, take it home in some sort of way. So this is Rupert. He's like, this is difficult to read. It makes me feel sick with anger. Failures occurred across every service. Laura Wilson's sister Sarah was raped in a school playground aged 11. She was so she was so young, she had no understanding of sex. When the attack occurred, the incident was the beginning of her systematic grooming and sexual assault, which saw her driven across the country to be raped by multiple men in one night and ignored by both the police and social services. At one point, her mother showed her phone to officers. It contained 177 numbers of adult Asian men. The police claimed that the Data Protection Act prevented them from investigating and that her daughter's behavior was a lifestyle choice. When Sarah reported an attack, the officer she spoke to laughed and refused to investigate. Like there's something seriously wrong there, you know, and it really actually makes for difficult like reading and listening, of course, and almost like an unfathomable treatment of young girls and the cover up of the establishment. It's just like all of it is just grotesque.
I've seen atrocities across the world, and what is being committed in my own country to our own children under the, you know, in front of those who are tasked with protecting them, in any other context would be seen as a war crime. In any other context would be seen as a war crime. It's heart wrenching, Gareth. And the truth of it is, the young woman you referred to, Laura, her her story is just one of tens of thousands of identical stories. And I look at this through different lenses, but the one that always comes back to me is I look at this through the lens of a human being. These people gang raped an 11-year-old child and then drove her around the country where she was gang raped by thousands more who paid them. And the police and the authorities knowingly failed to do anything about it. And if the mother had done anything else, if the father had got involved, the father would have been arrested by the police, and these men would have come and visited the mother and attacked her as well. And it sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it isn't. This is the reality experienced by thousands of working class girls who have been systematically abused by men from a community who hold white working class girls in complete contempt and who also know that they are politically protected, which is why the police did not intervene. It's because they are politically protected. This has got nothing to do with maintaining community relations or the fear of being branded racist. All of those excuses are nonsense. This is about, at best, the prejudices of the police towards working class white communities, and without a shadow of a doubt that the men who were committing these atrocities were protected, and they were protected because of the communities they came from and the relationships they had with politicians in positions of power. And that is why I respect Rupert Lowe, because he had the courage to stand up and say that and share that. Because when I was saying these things and sharing these things, I was being repeatedly arrested by the police. I spent 3 years of my life on police bail where they tried to imprison me, to try and silence me from what I was objecting to, which is the gang rape of children.
It's so difficult to hear what you're saying and to like even how does any of this stuff happen, like it makes you or makes me angry, right? I can only imagine deep down there's a lot of anger, but probably just as much sadness and everything in your heart too. Something interesting, a nice way to sort of understand a little bit more about this is again sort of starts with a bit of a tweet, right, of yours. You said, "My mother died before I could clear my name. My daughter screamed in fear as gangsters followed us home and carjacked us in an attempt to silence me. My family have been targeted, and the GM police continue to protect those attempting to silence me. My crime, refusing to look the other way, to the gang rape of my town's children. If you're following the story of the grooming gangs, it's because I have sacrificed 6 years of my life campaigning for justice." So before we get into the sort of a few more details of that, like there's actually the way you found out some of this information was from a guy, I think his name was Warren Bates.
Yeah, Warren, yeah, legend. He died. I sat at his deathbed last April. He was 86, 87 years old when he died. I met him when he was in his late 70s, early 80s, I think. Yeah.
And he handed you some information or something like that.
Yeah. I'd come back home, I'd helped clean up my local mosque. The chairman was a convicted sex offender. A friend's wife got in touch with me. I got in touch with the council, with the police. It turned out that he was protected because of his political links. I was outraged, and I launched a campaign, very open campaign, and forced him to step back and resign. The mosque then decided they needed to do basic police checks on the management committee members and stuff. So it was all fine. In terms of all fine, it worked out. Yeah, it worked out. They realized they'd done the right thing and they set about correcting that. Man called Warren Bates on Facebook back then, kept sending me messages. I didn't understand any of them because he never used full stops or commas. This was a man as I later found out when I got to know him, at 12 years old, he'd left school and he was working in the mines. He was a miner at 12 years old. So the fact that he could read and write and he'd gone on that journey, I think is remarkable. And another friend of mine, a former councillor, knew him. They'd worked together. He got in touch with me and said, Raja, please go and see this guy. He's now mithering me after mithering you. I'm like, okay. I went to see him. First day, I dropped my daughter off in school. Her first day in school, I dropped her off at the school. And then I got in my car and drove to Warren Bates's house. Eccentric man, former councillor for something called the UK Independence Party. He was a UKIP councillor. A bit crazy, I think, in a nice way, you know. And his wife was lovely, put a dossier in front of me, and the emails clearly showed that the leader of the council at the time, a man called Jim McMahon, who's now not just the MP, but a minister in Keir Starmer's government, conspired with the BBC to hide news of a network of Pakistani rape gangs that were operating out of shisha bars in the town. I exposed it. I raised it. I raised it with the council. They laughed at me, told me I was an online troll. They'll get me in trouble. They'll get me locked up. They tried. They've tried for a long time to do that. Long story short, we mobilized the town. I politically educated the town, for which I'm proud. If I look back on anything, I'm proud that instead of my townsfolk taking to the streets with petrol bombs, what they did was they took to the streets with leaflets, posted leaflets through people's letterboxes, and encouraged them to vote. And we voted out council leader after council leader after council leader. We mobilized the opposition councillors who would put forward motions in the council meetings demanding that the government come in and launch an investigation and inquiry. The Greater Manchester Mayor, a man called Andy Burnham, got involved. Nasty piece of work. He launched his own inquiry, which was basically an attempt to cover up what had happened. We exposed his cover up. The excuse me, the investigators that he recruited after 4 years have now resigned and fled because they've been exposed for their role in the cover up. And Andy Burnham has now changed his mind and has agreed that his investigation couldn't get to the truth when before he was claiming it was the best thing ever. Now, what we did was eventually, and it took us 6 years from meeting Warren Bates, it took us 6 years to get the council to a position where they were forced to vote through a motion calling for a public inquiry, which is the government coming in and investigating. And it was the response to that nationally in the United Kingdom has triggered this latest wave of outrage, because there's a government minister called Jess Phillips, who is supposed to be the Minister for Safeguarding Girls. That's her official role, the Minister for Safeguarding Girls, wrote back to the council, my council in Oldham, and said she wouldn't launch a public inquiry. So the Minister for Safeguarding Girls is refusing to safeguard girls. And that triggered everything that then subsequently followed. Elon Musk got involved. And the power of social media, brother, the power of me talking to you, because these conversations would not take place in the mainstream spaces and they wouldn't be shared to audiences of thousands or tens of thousands. And we've forced the government into a position where they released a statement yesterday where they're going to launch an inquiry, but it's still a cover-up because the inquiry doesn't have statutory powers. But this public inquiry will come. They know they've lost and we've won by using democracy. And it is thanks to a man called Warren Bates, who refuses to remain silent. He'd been working on this from 2012, 2013 onwards. He found me in 2019. And all I did was I asked myself every day the question. Every day I ask myself the question. I've been asking myself this question every day for the last 6 years. Why did I get involved? Why didn't I just walk away? Because they destroyed my life. They tried to kill me.
Do you ever find an answer for that? Why were you compelled to get in or step in and
I,
help?
I, 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 I've always been a spiritual person, and I think the experiences of the last 6 years, I think this was, no, I was put here. I was put here. In the town I come from, my set of skills are very unique. They're very unique in any northern sort of town. Someone who's done what I've done and come back to a small town to raise his daughter and tend to his mother. Those sorts of skills I have are few and far between. And I launched a campaign, and it was a political campaign. And I think in the end, I was meant to be where I am, and I was meant to be the person who led this to expose this. You've got to understand, you're the people who are watching this, hopefully on video, can see I have a very healthy tan, I'd say. I don't need to go on holiday to be brown. And despite that, despite me being very clear that I'm a Muslim, despite all of that, and despite me being awarded for keeping, and I say these things because they hate it, because it gives me legitimacy. Uh, Working at the highest level of government, despite all of that, the people, the MPs, the politicians in positions of power stood up in Parliament and made reference to me as a racist and far-right activist. Now, I ask the people who listen to you, your viewers, your listeners, to look at me, to listen to my words, and judge me. Do I come across to any of you as a racist or a far-right activist?
It's all they've got, isn't it? Like, and it goes back to like a line from Maggie Thatcher. I think she said, when they start calling you names, they've lost the arguments. And that's what it seems like these days. Like everyone is, like you're a racist or you're far right or whatever. Doesn't matter. So that's all they've got. We know, like you said, they've lost effectively because they're just calling us names that mean nothing these days anyway. Um, and yeah, I mean, like you're a far right bloke. I mean, give me a break. It's like so ridiculous. One thing I would like to find out though, like you intentionally focused on cover, like going for those that covered it up, right? As opposed to maybe helping the victims. Like, what was
Oh,
your
no, no,
thought process around that?
absolutely. There is an amazing woman. Her name is Maggie Oliver. She's got a foundation called the Maggie Oliver Foundation. She's been working with survivors. I'm the sort of person you send in first to take out the people you need to take out. And Maggie Oliver is the person you send to build the bridges afterwards. Yeah. And build the relationships and convince people that we're doing the right thing. The survivors, I know my skill set. It isn't to provide counseling. It isn't to do any of that. Every survivor I came across, I referred back to the foundation. And the foundation does remarkable work in terms of creating a safe space where these young women can, first and foremost, come to terms with what's happened to them and recognize it's not their fault. Children are never to blame, Gareth. The police and the authorities blamed the children for what happened to them. And the first step on this journey is to accept that what happened to you wasn't your fault. And she does that, the foundation does that, it creates these spaces, and then it provides the assistance with the therapy, and it campaigns. It tells their stories and it campaigns on behalf of these survivors. And my understanding of this situation is I went and looked across the country. And if we just focused on the survivors, we would never deal with the underlying conditions as to how they got to where they are. And 100,000 this year would become, what, 500,000, maybe in 5 years' time. So I realized that the best way in which to address this issue was to launch a political campaign that held to account both the individuals and also the system that allowed this to take place.
How like how do you feel now? You know, it feels like it's been a tough battle. Like how are you holding up?
We've won. I'm talking to you. The world now knows what's happened, and the world is outraged. It's now only a matter of time before they launch a public inquiry. These young women, every one of them, need to be given automatic compensation because their lives have been, you know, horrifically affected by what's happened and the failings. And of course, those in positions of power will weasel their way out like they always do, no matter what goes on. But it doesn't matter. We've won. There is change coming in this country, and we will. Those that rule over us will have to accept we weren't the far right activists that they claimed. We have every right to object to the gang rape of our children. And that horrific story you shared of that 11-year-old, of which there are tens of thousands identical, that will be put a stop to.
You've definitely been a great leader in terms of, you know, showing your daughter the way. Like I was wondering, what do you actually tell your daughter? Like, is she old enough to understand, and how do you protect her?
She's 10 now, and I, for a long time, uh, her mother and I, we now lead very separate lives, and she she knew from the beginning I was never a conventional sort of father, a conventional sort of man. So she accepts that, and she likes that, I think. But I think last week I picked her up from school, and I knew that's when I knew she knew more than she ever told me because she came running across the class, from the playground to give me a big hug, and it's because this story had broken in the world, and she never said anything, and I never said anything, but she knew I knew, and I knew she knew.
Hmm. Yeah, that must be. I don't know. I guess it must be kind of a nice feeling, hey? You know, like
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and they it's the right thing to do, Gareth. I think every one of us in our lives know at some point something comes along, and it doesn't have to be anything big. Something comes along, and there's something inside you knows that here is your opportunity to do the right thing, and then it's up to you to decide whether you can walk the walk.
yeah. Nothing is like a coincidence in some ways. Like there's a reason that Warren gave you that information, right? That
Yeah,
that information with anybody else would have made no sense, you know, like just based on your background and what you knew, and then I guess how
and
to
and
deal with it.
and there was a man referenced, and this is where I think there's a higher power involved in this guy. There was a man referenced in the emails. It was a man called Huey MacDonald, and he was essentially the whistleblower in the council who came across this information. He was responsible for safeguarding children. He'd spent, I think, 20 years or so, 15 years, 20 years as a magistrate, senior magistrate in the town. And he leaked the information to an organization that worked with children, responsible for working with children. And they sacked him. They essentially sacked him and covered it up. Now, Huey MacDonald, I knew from a past life, just by coincidence. When I was younger, I worked in a council estate, and he was a local councillor who'd just pop in every now and then, give certificates to the children, that sort of stuff. And that relationship with him I don't think it was coincidental. So I got Warren to phone Huey, and half an hour later, I sat in Huey's house, and he gave me another series of, documents to look at. So there's relationships involved. If my friend Miah hadn't told me to go and see Warren, I'd never have gone and seen him. And you look back and think, oh, that's a coincidence. That's a coincidence. That's a coincidence. And then your skill set is an entire coincidence. No, if you genuinely believe in fate, so or how a higher power, whatever God you believe in, I think I was meant to be in the place where I found myself in.
Yeah, it totally feels like it's just to maybe like end this off on on like a lighter note, I'd love to know quickly, what's the day like, or the occasion like, when you get your MBE like presented to you? Is it all pomp and ceremony? What are you actually, what is
Oh,
involved?
it was hilarious. So it was the it was 2005, I think it was, where I finally got it. But it was hilarious. My mother went, and it was my mother's proudest day. So she came along, and my first generation ethnic minorities in the United Kingdom are 100% royalists. Yeah, the king, the queen, anything to do with that, they can't believe it. So you go to Buckingham Palace, and there's a whole host of chairs lined up. I got wheeled off somewhere else to go and have drinks and biscuits with other people, and my mum and my friend who was with me, and my daughter's mother was with me, and they all got piled off somewhere else. And I queue up, and I'm looking, and you line up, and you go up to see the Queen. You get 30 seconds with her, and the Queen says, "That's your mum behind you, isn't it?" And I look across, and she's smiling at me. I said, "Yes." So they line up the chairs. It's very pomp and ceremony. Everything's meticulous. So they line up the chairs certain centimeters apart from each other, next to each other. My mum, being the old Asian lady that she is, decided she needed a closer seat. So she grabbed over a chair and moved it about 2 feet further forward than anyone else, so she could be closer.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, yeah. It was I didn't know what to say to the Queen. I was like, "Yes, that's my mother."
Oh, that's great. I love it. She probably loved it too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It made a day, and when the dark times came, she took solace from that. That actually, that my son is right. He's doing things for the right reason, and hopefully, hopefully she's looking over me somewhere and thinking, "Yeah, he's come through this."
Yeah, I'm sure she's super proud of you and everything that you've done. So just as we finish off here, is there anything that you like excited about that's coming up in the future for you?
For me personally, I go on train journeys with my daughter. So we go on these sleeper trains. You travel a lot, don't you? So
Yeah, we're
she
going
loves
on one
these.
in a couple of weeks, actually, in
Yeah,
3 nights actually.
yeah, she loves the sleeper trains, and there's a sleeper train that cuts across Europe, and it's got a new venue. I think we went on it to Prague, is where it extended to, but now apparently it goes all the way to Venice. So she's already worked out how many hours we're going to spend on a train traveling to Venice from Brussels, I think, or Amsterdam, wherever we catch it. So I enjoy it. I enjoy sleeper trains. I do enjoy sleeper trains. They're very basic. It's nothing like the Orient Express, but there's something magical about seeing the world through a child's eyes, and seeing how, when they get big saucepan eyes at things that I knew. I took her to Prague, and she was just amazed. And I'd been to Prague before, and I stopped and looked back, and I thought, yeah, I'd completely missed how magical it is. So we're both looking forward to Venice.
That's very cool. I'm busy traveling around the world with my wife and my daughter. She's 2.5, and it's like it's a whole different experience,
Yeah.
and you just appreciate things. And like you said, you see it through their eyes, and you're like, yeah, wow, that is cool,
Yeah, yeah,
actually
yeah, yeah.
think
You get
about it.
used to it, don't you? You get used to stuff,
Yeah.
and then once you look at it, no, that is, take a moment and look at something and appreciate it, because we only here one time round, brother. So we need to make the most of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what does being, say, ridiculously human mean to you, Raja?
I think when I came across you and you asked me, and I obviously, when I looked, I thought, oh, this guy's all right. What he wants to do is just talk about the ordinary, and how exceptional and how magical the ordinary is, and to take value in that. And in an increasingly material world of chasing status and fakery and whatnot, I think taking joy in the everyday.
That's great. And it's so true. Hey, it's like, man, we miss out on so much if we don't take notice of those small little things, like, because you're chasing something bigger or whatever the story is. Like, there's literally so many little moments every single day that are just like, you'll look back and you go, wow. Because it was interesting. I watched this documentary quite a few years ago, and the guy was, every single day he wrote down 3 small things that happened, right? And he went, and at the end of the year he read this thing back, and he was like, wow, none of those things I would ever have remembered if I didn't write them down.
Yeah.
And like now having them written down, I'm like, wow, I lived a great year. But if I hadn't have written them down, it would have been like, yeah, I didn't really do much this year. You know what I mean? Like, and we do. There are so many cool moments. So I think it's an important thing to be conscious of. So thanks, man. I just wanted to say, you are a special human being, and what you are doing is just phenomenal. And you were definitely put on this planet to do that. And I just want to like honestly like a genuine thank you from the bottom of my heart as a father and a human. I don't think people understand what it is maybe that you've gone through, and that what you've done and what you've exposed, and what you're now reaping the rewards for, because there is going to be some some repercussions for the people that have committed these atrocities. And you are a strong man. And I mean, well done for coming through it all. And I'm sure there's still a lot of fights to go, but there's also a lot of fight left in you. But now the cool thing is that, you know, it's out there, and you've got I would say, a silent army behind you. And I encourage the army to start talking up more. You know, you've spoken a bit about this in the podcast, but I think it's an important thing for people to grow a bit of a backbone now in where we are in society. And we need to come together. We need to realize how strong we are together, and we must stop we must stop trying to create divide amongst ourselves. And we definitely need to sort of resolve the powers that be, like in terms of, you know, just coming together and saying enough's enough. We need you guys to do a better job and look after us. So thank you so much for your time. And I just wish you all the best with everything, buddy.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful for you reaching out, and I am going to spend the rest of my day with a smile on my face because I genuinely enjoyed this conversation with you. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure, buddy.